Hello and welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Historical Humans podcast. Today we return to our regularly scheduled programming as we dive into our 16th episode on Japanese theater. Now, thankfully for us, one of my fellow co-hosts is somewhat of an expert on Japanese culture. Uh, can we point out who that is?
Yeah, doing their thesis on it. Uh, doing two theses on it.
So, do you just want to dive right in? Let's just go for it. I mean, obviously, Gwendolyn here is our resident Japanese expert who's surrounded by archaeologists, so
Yeah.
someone knows
Shout
more
out
than
to all the
most.
cultural anthropologists. We get left behind quite a lot.
Now's your time to shine.
Truly, truly. Uh, yeah. We're gonna go over about five uh, forms of Japanese theater. Maybe go into a couple other ones, but these are the main ones that Colum so graciously curated for us to talk to.
Yay.
Um,
The bottomless
yeah,
barrel of facts, Colum
Yep.
Coleman.
Yep.
yes.
And for the record, the people's here names are.
Yeah. Well, obviously, we've got Gwendolyn Allen, our Japanese expert, Colum Coleman, our bottomless barrel of facts, and my name is Justin Woods, and I'm just here to do the intro.
Yeah. Yes. Now we sweep him away and we begin.
Yes. Me and Colum are huge fans of Japanese theater. I believe your favorite is Kabuki, right? Or is it Bunraku?
I've never actually seen any of this performed.
You've never seen performances?
I've
Okay.
never seen a single performance of
You
any.
just
I
like
just
the idea of
researched.
it.
I just
Okay.
researched this. All right. I like the idea of storytelling. Theater is storytelling, so I do tend to get very into it. I have never
All
seen a
right.
performance of any of these.
Well, I'm definitely going to suggest that you do. I suggest everyone listening to do it. There are some amazing documentaries out there if you don't want to watch like a full performance. If you go on YouTube, you can look up performances. Most of the time, you can find ones with English subtitles attached to them. So they're fantastic. Even if you don't speak Japanese, you can definitely enjoy the medium. And they've got all different kinds of genre, as with any other theater. And we're gonna go straight into Kabuki theater, which is a stylized dance drama. It's absolutely gorgeous, um, very inclusive and dynamic in the way that the stage is laid out for people. So if we just go into like a little bit of a history of it, so all the roles traditionally in kabuki style theater are played by male actors. That's not that's not the case originally. It used to be exclusively performed by women. There is even like the legend that the first performance was by a shrine maiden in Kyoto, specifically a maiden of the Izumo no Izumo no Okuni Grand Shrine. I can't speak. And so her new dance style really caught the eye of the imperial court. However, in the Tokugawa shogunate, there was an edict done that forbade female performers. Colum, you know more about the date than I
Yeah.
do.
So it Kabuki began in early 17th century Kyoto. It was originally performed in the pleasure districts as sort of an all-night theater. It was a nighttime performance. You'd sit down and for dinner you'd have food and drink brought out throughout the night, and they'd perform the whole night through. And this caught the eye of the newly established Tokugawa shogunate, which was just beginning its Edo period following centuries of civil war in Japan. So it was this new art form and a new era of peace, and the imperial court wanted to promote it. And it took them less than a century to go from noticing this art form to outright banning its performers. As
Yes.
by the end of the 7th century, the court had deemed it immoral to see women on stage dancing in this manner. And thus, the troops had to shift from exclusively women performers to exclusively male performers.
Just because of a very sexist change in law. That's honestly
Yeah, it
kind of
is.
interesting.
Yeah, it is. It
I mean,
is.
you find that a lot in history. Just saying.
The
Yeah.
real irony here is it's the same government that discovered it and promoted it is also the government that bans it. Like there is no major power change in between. Sure, there's different heads of the Tokugawa clan and different shoguns that between the one that promotes it and the one that bans it, but it's the same lineage of military leaders
Now, was
running the
there a
thing.
specific reasoning for it? Was it because of like ideology? Was there a shift in religious practices?
Uh, Not that I really saw. It was more of this idea that it was more of like trying to establish a sense of normalcy and morality. Sort of the Edo period is Japan rebuilding itself, re identifying itself for something other than constant warfare,
Yeah,
especially
so you're
constant warfare with other Japanese people.
Yeah, so you're trying to bring each other together, and you're also trying to establish what are the roles
Yeah.
that we're each going to play. And I think that really plays into
Mhm.
that being like, oh, women
Yeah.
probably shouldn't be doing this. It's too erotic for
Yeah.
us, too immoral. This is the role that the woman should play in the household. And there are shifts that you see in Japan throughout different like restructuring periods. The role of the mother, the role of the woman in the house really does shift those things. It's the same with education because of the role that they wanted mothers to play. You see education get ramped up because of how much they value women in the household, which is like good in one way, bad in another way because it limits what they're allowed to do. But that's probably what where this shift comes from in trying to establish those things.
Yeah, the art form got promoted because it was a new art form. We're trying to establish a new social order. This is something that we can claim is uniquely ours and has as a sort of guide stone for what we're doing. And then as that social order begins to crystallize and form, the gender roles begin to be defined, and that comes into conflict with how this art was being performed at the time, as the Edo period kind of wanted a established strict gender role, and this art form violated that, so the art form had to change.
Yeah, but they still wanted this art form to keep
Yep.
it because it was so iconic and so beautiful. So we see all male cast, and it's still all male today. I do know that there was a kind of push to have an all female group. Again, I don't know if that's still happening. I was aware of that like 5 years ago. Um, but there are those kinds of shifts because people want to bring women back into it because that's what it was originally done. But then there is this long tradition of it just being men, and it is very much a apprenticeship learning. So actors take on the stage names of their teachers, and you study under them. You live up to their reputation and their skill level, and then you take it on. So it's very hard to break into it and to learn those things. So those can be quite difficult. But it is an amazing performance. Just to get back to that, the productions are incredibly elaborate in terms of costuming, in terms of just stage features in general. You have trapdoors, you have revolving sets, you have rotating backgrounds. The stage is not like our stages where it's just this like one
It's
one
not.
stage and then you have the audience. It goes through the
Yeah,
audience.
there are footbridges leading through the audience in what we would normally consider to be aisle space for people to enter and exit the theater. That is, in fact, part of the stage for the theater, as people will run and walk and act in the middle of the audience.
So,
Yeah.
have you guys ever been to the Looking Glass Theater in Chicago?
Nope.
No.
It's right across the street from the water tower, and their stage setup is very immersive in that regard. I went to go see Treasure Island, and that's what that makes me think of, because as you're sitting there, the characters are running past you as if you're on an upper deck of the ship, and the stage was front and center and surrounded by the crowd on three sides. So to compensate for that, yeah.
Yeah. It'd be much more similar to a box stage like that than a traditional, more stage where you have the curtains separating, an elevated platform from an audience. It'd be much more like that sort of box stage setup. I think it's a little bit more integrated than that because it's a footbridge. Like there's a bridge onto the stage from the audience as opposed to, the stage still being elevated and out of reach just that little bit.
But that's got to be really cool to experience because that really added an immersive aspect to the play of, wow, I'm in the play because these people are running past me.
Yeah. It definitely is. It's fantastic. I wish I could see one in person. I have not had the pleasure of doing that, but even looking at videos of it, you can definitely see that immersive experience that they have.
Yeah, so, this kabuki was and still is such a integral cultural treasure for Japan that in 2008, UNESCO named it an intangible cultural heritage for the world. That's how unique and prominent and honestly beautiful this art form is.
So what you're saying is we need to go see one.
I think everyone should see one if they have the chance. They're incredibly beautiful, and they do historical dramas, love stories, moral tales, comedies, tragedies. It doesn't matter what kind of story it is, it can tell it, and it's absolutely fantastic, and the music is amazing as well.
Yeah, traditional Japanese instruments are played during these performances to sort of add to that atmosphere. Sorry, you can go, Gwen.
I was just going to say, they're very integral into, like, it's not just like background music. It very much accents the story beats and everything. So it's not like an orchestra that you'd hear at like a theater. They make, what are they called?
Music.
Not music. Not music, but the sound effects. They do sound effects with the traditional instruments and things like that when they're doing the play. And it's I think it's almost always with traditional instruments, not with any modern ones.
No,
that's all I was going to say.
There is no kabuki electric guitar. All right, we do not blend Black Sabbath into kabuki stories.
I don't know. Crazy Train would slap during a play.
That'd be interesting. I want to see what historical drama brings in Crazy Train and Black Sabbath.
Yeah. One of the most interesting things for me about kabuki before we move on to the other art forms is when you do a kabuki story, when you do a performance, you're only telling part of the actual story. It's not a complete performance like what we would think of where like Shakespeare, where it's the whole play written from beginning to end is meant to be performed verbatim. With kabuki, it is whatever parts are deemed interesting and important by the acting troupe when they go to perform it that time. So there's a lot of variability with even just the same story.
Yeah, which is pretty fantastic. It reminds me of jazz.
Jazz hands.
You're never gonna hear the same performance twice with jazz, and so you're never gonna see the same story or the same thing twice with kabuki because it all changes, which is fantastic, like life.
That is really cool, though, because then you're getting a one-in-a-lifetime experience.
Mm-hmm. Unless they videotape it. Oh, my God. Unless they record it and they put it on YouTube. I feel like I outed myself on my age. Um,
We got Grandma Gwendolyn over here.
yeah, it's like, oh, videotaping. Nope. Ugh, God, I feel old. It was just my birthday too, so I just feel even more old. But why don't you introduce the next one as I have an existential crisis?
Yeah, sure. The next art form we have is called No, and it is a dance drama that's performed while wearing wooden masks, and these masks are carved from a single block of wood. They are meant to show different emotions based on the angle that they are presented to the audience. So head on might be very happy. If I turn my head slightly, I might be surprised. If I go down, I'm angry. It changes the expression on the mask based on how it is turned towards the audience. So you've got about
Yes.
5 or 6 faces marked onto one single piece of wood.
These masks are incredible. They're made from Japanese cypress, and the um, art that goes into them, the carving is just absolutely fantastic. It's like when you see one of those optical illusions like on your phone screen and you kind of like trip out a little bit. That's these masks in real life, and the performance, and they're very cool.
Yeah, and it is the oldest existing form of Japanese theater. Kabuki, which we talked about, which is very popular, only goes back to the 17th century. No goes all the way back to the 8th century, but it began being performed in the version that we know it as today in the 14th century. So it is approximately 1,200 years old, 12 to 1,300, somewhere in that range.
Yeah, and like some other Japanese theater performances, they use fans as props to stand in for other tools. So they're limited in the kind of props that they have as well. And there are only about 5 schools that do these performances um, in Japan. So 5 places that you can learn this from. It's not small groups really that perform this at all.
Yeah, no,
So is it considered a super prestigious thing then to be a part of these troops and to be selected for it?
Yeah, I mean, again, this is a really valued performance art. There are some theater theater types that aren't getting as much recognition, but there's also been, I think, in like the last maybe, I want to say 10 years. I might be wrong in that. There has been a revival of arts. So, and some that have kind of died away, we kind of see this revival coming back for them. But I think, um, especially for No and Kabuki, they've always been these big performances that you go to and you see and you experience because they are so, integral to Japanese theater.
Interesting.
Yeah, and with No, there is a father-son duo called Kanami and Ziami, who were performer playwrights, and they are credited with writing the 250 stories that are the No plays that we have today. So, yeah, these two people are credited with writing that many that many stories. I don't know how much I believe they wrote them all, but they were definitely prolific.
Like, are you
Definitely.
thinking it's a Da Vinci kind of or Michelangelo credit taking where the students did a lot of the background work, or is it like well, we're just gonna borrow all of it?
Well, it's a father and son duo, and you see a lot with these art forms for actors and performers in especially Japanese theater, that it goes through families or it goes through apprenticeships that are like very close. Uh, so who knows? It also might have been like well, I don't think it would have been a Shakespeare thing, but
I, my
collected
best
and performed.
Yeah, my best guess is that later versions of the original plays would tie themselves back to these people to sort of provide legitimacy for this newer No play that you are performing. As
Mm.
No is a very serious art, and so having a tradition of establishing, oh, it's just an underperformed version of one of Xiami's works, would give you legitimacy to perform it in some cases. That's my personal theory on this.
All speculation. All
I do
speculation.
not have exact facts. They are the simple fact of the matter is Konami and Xiami are credited with all 250 plays, and I did not find anyone disputing that legitimacy.
Honestly, good for them. If they're the Japanese Shakespearean playwrights, I respect it.
Mhm.
Yeah, very, very prolific, very good. And so these plays are structured around song and dance. They have a major emphasis on music, and the movements within this dance are very slow. So it's very, very deliberate, very slow. Movement is a really big thing. Obviously, it's dance.
Yeah, there's a lot of very heady topics with this. It's a lot of history and literature and uh, general mythos of gods and demons and nature that sort of these stories are performed as. These are very serious stories, and they take themselves very seriously in the performance. These
So,
people
with it
look.
being surrounded by mythos and gods, is it like a Iliad type situation then, where it's someone recounting the story of these gods, or is it just like a retelling of oral or the historical tradition?
Um, so Japanese mythos is very different from Greek mythos, I would say, um, because yes, there is, I guess you could call it a pantheon, but not quite.
Yeah,
So a lot of gods and spirits and yokai and oni um, are very like localized. And then you have like a little outer localization, and then you have for like the whole country. So it's there are like tales and there are stories, but I wouldn't say that there's like specific ones that they probably recount. It's probably more in tied to specific like literature, specific historical events that mention gods or demons interacting with them, but not specifically on like one god or one demon that I know of.
yeah, and to get more, I think more direct at your question, Justin. This isn't so much a medium where there's a narrator going, "Let me recount to you the tale of." It's more reenact. It's more reenactment of this play that's been performed hundreds of times over. That is based on this historical story. It's not. There's no separate narrator like there is in like the Iliad and the Odyssey going, oh, let me sing to you of this glorious time. It's more these are these characters come on and they perform.
Yeah, yeah. I wasn't questioning the narration. I was just questioning more of like, I don't want to say the legitimacy, but more the validity of the stories that they're portraying.
Like how historically accurate are they?
Yeah, or if like they're tied to, as Gwen put it, like the pantheon. I think Gwen did a good job of addressing that question.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's also like really important to remember that so a lot of these gods come from Shinto, and that's very much tied to everyday. I mean, there are still people that talk about spirits, influencing things, and interacting with people. So it's not so much like having a spirit or a god or a demon in your historical drama is going to change the validity of the historical drama, because a lot of historical accounts have those things in them, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean it's not like the Hamilton play.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a difference between historical and historically accurate. Even with like your example of Homer with the Iliad and the Odyssey. Those are historical performances. They are not particularly historically accurate for the fall of Troy.
But like that's what I'm asking, and with the aspect of the pantheon or the just gods in general, if it were tied in, or if these playwrights are more, if they're more entertainment or more for factual purposes, I guess. But you answered that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, they're for entertainment. I don't think someone would go to this and write their history paper. Uh,
Well, there goes my dissertation, I guess.
So
but anyways, this is another um, type of theater that has an all male cast as well. Um, and again, it's performed live with traditional music, traditional instruments, and it's performed in an open square stage supported by four pillars, with a backdrop normally consisting of a painting of a single pine tree.
very
So it's kind of,
minimalist.
yeah,
Like it's the
minimalist,
opposite.
outdoorsy.
Yeah, it's the opposite of kabuki in a lot of ways.
Yes.
Like we have this single tree. It stands for wherever the hell we said it is.
Yeah. Yeah, one of the main three classical theaters, you got to have the minimalistic as well. And then this was also named an intangible cultural heritage by UNICEF.
Yeah, and just to get into it, the three classical theaters are Kabuki, No, which we've gone over, and Bunraku, which we will get to in a bit.
Bunraku.
Because before we go to Bunraku, we do have Kyojin, which is a comedy that grew out of the No plays. Because anything that gets super serious, someone's gonna have fun with.
Yeah, I mean, you always got to have comedy.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Kyogen has is a traditional comedy, very very slapstick and satire. Uses stock characters. And the funny thing is that these were originally intermissions for no performances because you gotta laugh in between the heavy stuff. And it involved its own separate art form, and performance stages that people will go to separately.
Yep. And one of the fun things about it is Kyojin is performed in a very archaic form of Japanese, to the point where it's actually kind of hard for people who are native Japanese speakers to understand the exact words of what's going on.
Archaic is an interesting word to use, but yeah, it's old Japanese.
Yeah.
It's like I feel like it's akin to hearing Shakespeare English, but it might be a little bit further back than that.
A little more Middle English than Shakespearean English would be.
Yeah, maybe. I'm not exactly sure about that one. Learning Japanese, it is all Greek to me. So
Wouldn't it be all Japanese? I know it's a matter
the saying is it's Greek to me because I have a hard time understanding. What I'm saying is that both forms of Japanese are very hard for me to understand. It's an incredibly difficult language.
What we've done is we've transliterated the Greek out of kanji, but instead of putting it in Romaji, we've put it into Greek. So instead of using Roman letters, we're just using Greek letters to sound everything out.
Exactly. Listen, we're ignoring Rome in this, and just using Greek. Yeah, it's very confusing. But anyways, in Kyogen, they use exaggerated speech and expressions and movements. So instead of no, where it's very deliberate, very slow, this is very exaggerated and comical, which is great. It reminds me of like the Three Stooges in a way.
Yep. And along with Kyojin and No, along with No and Kabuki, Kyojin was named a intangible cultural heritage in 2008. That's sort of when UNESCO got around to going through all these Japanese theater forms and rubber stamping them as, yeah, that is kind of important, and we should make sure we preserve that for posterity, seeing as how it still exists after several hundred years, or in the case of No,
2008, big
over
year.
thousands.
And then the next theater that we have, which I think people are more familiar with Bunraku than any other Japanese theater. I think mainly because it's like 60 minutes. I don't know, some really big like American documentary thing did a whole thing on Bunraku. I know that's how my grandma heard of it. I was very interested in it. But it is Japanese puppet theater. They're incredibly cool puppets. I definitely suggest people looking them up and seeing them because they're incredibly fantastic. And it began as entertainment for commoners in Osaka during the Edo period. I believe it was first performed in 1684.
And it sort of evolved very rapidly over the last part of the 17th century to become what we see now. It sort of went through this rapid, what's the word?
Evolution.
Rapid evolution very early on to become what we know, and then it stabilized and has more or less persisted for the last 300 years.
Yeah, they're not like sock puppets or like, you know, little easily maneuverable puppets. These are incredibly complex puppets with hundreds of moving parts. It requires 3 people to operate it. And these are huge puppets. They're not they're like almost the size of a person.
Yeah, and to one of the things I found is to be fully trained in how to operate each part of the puppet takes 15 years. It takes 15 years of training to learn how to operate it. It's 5 years for the legs, 5 years for the arms and hand, and another 5 years just to move the head and get all the expressions.
Yes, it takes a lot. No, half the size of a person. That's
if they were life size, it would be Punch and Judy of nightmarish proportions.
Okay, but even still, half-sized is a ridiculously large size puppet. Especially when you can consider most puppeteers use ones that are like 12, 18 inches at most.
Yeah, it's much bigger than Yoda. Jim Henson has nothing on these people.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, and this is another one that's like paced. The pace is with the music, very much determined by it. But yeah, if you ever see these puppets and the way that they're used, it's incredible. Obviously, like the puppeteers are all in black and trying to kind of not be seen, but the way that they move is incredible, and they shift too. There are some heads where it shifts from being, you know, this like cute, dainty girl to like a demon. They're really cool.
Yeah. And one of the fun things with this is there's exactly one actor for the entire story, and they must narrate everyone's parts.
Yes.
Everyone. You have to perform as every single character in the cast, so you've got to be really good with your voice.
Yes. And it's so interesting because we'll see this in another art form where it's one person voicing everyone. And so it's really important to be able to shift your diction and your pitch and the way that you say certain things to denote different characters and to have that specificity and fluidity in your acting.
Yeah, if Robin Williams did the Muppets.
Robin Williams could. Like, if I think we picked any actor, any American actor to shift over into that, he could. Absolutely. It'd be in English because I don't think he spoke Japanese, but
I don't know. That
and
man
these
could do some magic.
truly and these stories consisted mainly of love stories, heroic legends, and also historical events. So I mean, right up Robin Williams' alley. He'd be like, "Let's do a love story. Let's be heroic." Maybe not historical events, but definitely.
I don't know. He can reference historical events. We've all seen him in The Genie.
Reference, but play out, who knows? I mean, he was fantastic in Good Will Hunting. But this is not about Robin Williams. Let's say him and
We could
let's
do a
stay on
whole
I
podcast
have,
episode on that
I have,
man.
I have
really
distracted them. My job is now complete.
kidding. Yes. But
It's cool.
Bunraku is amazing. Obviously, also named an intangible cultural heritage in 2008 as well,
Yep.
because it is one of the three major classical theaters in Japan. Absolutely amazing. Again, you guys should all see these performances. It's a Google search away.
Yeah. And that brings us to some of the, I don't want to say smaller forms of playwright entertainment, but ones that seem to have a lot less information readily available about them, which I thought was very unfortunate.
And he's going to say one that I guarantee almost everyone knows, but most people know incorrectly, which is
Let's go with geisha.
yes.
Let's go with geisha. It is a Japanese dance.
It
Yeah.
is. And a lot of people associated with prostitutes, and that is not accurate. Geisha is, again, traditionally women.
Yep.
And they perform dances. They also took place in tea ceremonies for people, but they're not associated with sleeping with people. They're just performers and hosts, and you're normally born into being a geisha, as it is again structured with family. You learn very young because you have to have a specific way of posturing and acting. There's a lot you have to know for geisha. It is not as popular as it used to be um, way back when, but it is it is still done today, and is still, I would say pretty important, and pretty visible.
So, can you explain it to me like I'm five? Because you say it's the most popular form. So, have I seen it in popular culture? Is it on a widely referenced show?
I definitely think so. Um, so I feel is maybe not popular, but well known, I would say, in the Americas or Europe in reference to Japan. You'll see, like, I mean, a lot of people know, like, Geisha Girl. There is a way to do it offensively, there's a way to do it non offensively. But a lot of people do associate it with this kind of demure girl that's, pleasing men or something. They were very, how do I say this? Well known in Kyoto.
Yep.
I think they moved to Tokyo, but they were around a lot of generals. So a lot of political men would go and visit geisha girls to talk shop, to
There's definitely
socialize with other people. Yeah,
there's definitely an association of the geisha with men of status.
Yes.
As you would it was sort of considered very respectable and very prominent. If you were a powerful person, you would be entertained by a geisha tonight. That was the sort of thing that went on. To answer your question, Justin, I do remember, if we want to go all the way back to like the 1970s, very popular detective show called Lieutenant Columbo. There is an episode called Murder Under Glass, during which point the murderer is entertaining a master chef from Japan with a pair of geisha performers in his room, in his sort of dining room, while they perform.
I respect you speaking to our older boomer audience in.
I was gonna say, I don't even know what
Yeah.
Detective Columbo is.
It's an old crime show. It's an old crime show, but it's one of the few things I can think of that features it in a very respectful manner, as
Yeah,
opposed to a cartoonish manner. Because the in Murder Under Glass, the geisha, they are kneeling there, they are performing instruments. They're just there like a normal musician would be, just performing on a stringed instrument. They give the little bow, and the lieutenant comes in, and they're just there being pleasant and relatively respected.
yeah,
As opposed to like the popular opinion that it's a hooker, and it's not.
I know it's mainly like 80s movies that it's come from, but like anything that's like set in Chinatown and you're like running through Chinatown, there's always this like
Mhm.
section, and I cannot specifically name anything, which like sucks. I should be able to, but it's
Heavily naked
generally
women, all
geisha
white.
garb, but they're presented as hookers. And I think that's a common misconception that people have, anyways, because they entertained powerful men. And if you're trying to make that equivalent in the United States, it's generally, oh, they're expensive hookers for politicians. I mean, that's not what they were at all.
They fly to
Geisha,
special islands for that.
yeah,
No.
geisha women were also very much educated, so that they could have good conversation with the politicians or the generals and whatnot too.
Okay.
So
And
So
I was going to say one of the things that is very unique to geisha, at least in so far as our conversation has been, is this is actually the first traditional art form that post dates the Tokugawa shogunate and the Edo period. Because geisha, is this sort of dance form, really began in the 1870s, after the Tokugawa shogunate and the Edo period had ended, and the capital moved from Kyoto to Tokyo. And geisha dancing and these educated women who could be associated with and entertain wealthy and powerful men was Kyoto's sort of way of holding on to relevance and power.
yeah.
also kind of interestingly is that the timeline there coincides with the opening of Japan and the opening of Tokyo.
Yeah. I believe the Tokugawa shogunate ends with the Meiji Restoration.
Yeah.
So this is right at the sort of right at the end of the Meiji Restoration, or when that movement kicks off after that initial like turnover period.
Yeah.
Kyoto is no longer the capital of Japan. Kyoto needs a way to attract powerful people and be relevant, so they invest in these performers that would keep people coming to Kyoto, despite the fact that it has lost its status as the nation's capital.
Yeah, but I feel like Kyoto was also big for military even after Tokyo
Oh yes,
became the capital. I might be misremembering that, but I feel like that was one of the big things for Kyoto afterwards.
It remained a prominent military place. The shogunate was a military government, whereas after the Meiji Restoration, it was a civilian government with heavy military influence. And so the civilian government moves its capital, all its bureaucrats, all its politicians, to Tokyo. And Kyoto's kind of looking for a way to sort of hang on to that relevance of having the military and the civilians here. And what's a good way to show off status? What's a good way to sort of draw those people back to Kyoto and visit it, so that Kyoto doesn't go into a decline and just become a military base.
Okay,
and,
yeah.
That's
second guessing for a bit.
No, this is the city trying to hold on to that political relevance that came with being the center of literally everything on the island of Japan.
Yeah, and this was also very popular too when you had foreign emissaries and politicians coming to visit. Um, Geisha was a good thing to show, which I think is also why we hear about it as well, because that was a form of Japanese entertainment that, you know, powerful foreigners would see, and then when they come back can talk about. Rather as they probably wouldn't have gone to any of these other performances during their stay.
Yeah, they wouldn't have necessarily bought a ticket to sit down for a all-night theater in Japanese when
Yeah.
you're a European colonial power and you don't speak the language and already think you're better than everyone else.
Eh.
What you might do is you might pay a person in makeup to follow you around and play an instrument.
Well, not follow you around. It happened within the room. It was also supervised too to make sure, you know,
Everyone behaves
men
themselves.
didn't do. Yeah, everyone behaves themselves, being respectful and everything like that.
Yeah. Because one person is a soldier who is drinking. The other person is a woman with a guitar.
Yeah,
Yes,
that equation doesn't seem to end well for her in most situations,
yes.
unfortunately.
But geisha were well respected. So
Yeah. It gets out that you hurt a geisha. Um, your
oh
superior
yeah, it's not
officers
going
and
well.
everyone in the entire city is going to want to have a word with you, possibly
Yes.
with their fists.
Yeah, there were many geisha women that were well respected for their opinions and things. But again, they were well educated. They had conversations with these people, and entertained too. So they weren't just an object for show and to be entertained by. It's very, very different from I think how the West sort of views them.
Yeah.
Honestly, I respect them for them being well educated while still participating in this kind of art form. Like, that is a double whammy if I have ever seen one.
Yeah. And you
Well,
remember,
I mean, it was very important. You had to be aware of that because it's not just playing an instrument. It's not just dancing. It's a whole thing. Sorry,
yeah,
Colin, I cut you off.
yeah, and just this is a very you notice this is a very stark shift from all the previous forms of theater we've talked about, where which during the Edo period with the Tokugawa shogunate, women aren't allowed to be entertainers, very explicitly not allowed to be entertainers, and right after that ends, suddenly there's a whole new form of women entertainers who are very educated, very respectable, very prominent. It's like, it's almost as if the military government was suppressing something.
No, 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 no.
That can't possibly have contributed to its collapse after 2.5 centuries.
No.
Yeah. But speaking of the West, Gwendolyn, that does, I think, bring up the next thing on our list, the Takarazuka Review, which is when Japanese is a form of Japanese theater formed, I think, right around the start of World War One to perform Western plays.
Yes, it is Takarasuka.
Yeah, I cannot pronounce that.
Don't
that
worry, I like
it's,
I hit the beats on that one for you.
yeah, that is that is a lot of switching between consonant and vowels for me.
Yeah. But yeah, and it's an all female theater troupe too that was formed in 1914, which letting the women back into theater, woohoo, which was pretty fantastic. I know they did Western style musical dramas, but I don't know any prominent ones. Do you?
I don't really know any specific ones that they would have played. One of the things I did come across, though, is that there is a tradition involving this where at the end of the performance, everyone who attended would line up outside the theater according to social status, and you would sort of like shake hands with the actresses as they came out of the theater and applaud them, which is a very interesting because it's a very orderly line, and it's almost like a rock star or a politician on campaign coming out and shaking hands and kissing babies and waving to the crowds and doing its whole thing. It's a very organized tradition that no one actually organizes. The people in Japan just do it themselves.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's one of the things I've always respected about Japan, is the kind of organization and respect that goes into it. Uh, you always hear very interesting things about when Japanese people visit other places and the respect that they show for things that the people who live there don't. Like, I think it was FIFA, the FIFA World Cup. When a lot of Japanese people went over and they left the stadium, they cleaned up after themselves. It was like uh, the cleanest section after the um, Japan versus the other countries game. That was hilarious. But yeah, very, very respectable. Very nice. There's one more that I want to talk about, and it is called rakugo.
Yeah, and you
It is
shamed me
not.
with this one. You shamed me with this one. Of course, it was not in the bottomless barrel of facts.
So, for
I
reference
know.
to anyone playing at home, before we started recording and when we did our preliminary discussion about the topic, there may have been a verbal attack from one of our cast members to the
Verbal
other.
attack? No.
Just we have these conversations off screen so that the people do not have to hear them.
Yes.
Just know that this did not make it into the bottomless barrel of facts, which has me questioning what the hell are the sources telling me.
Yes. I was just surprised because this is one of my favorite forms of Japanese theater and entertainment. Don't go finger quoting me on that. And it is called rakugo, and it is a single performance comedy, generally comedy sketch, form of storytelling that is done in Japan. It kind of has died out and come back in. Maybe that's why it's not in Column's bottomless barrel of facts. But I guess we hit a bottom, maybe a ledge going down there. But it's absolutely fantastic. And there's one person who sits on a stage in traditional attire, and they will do storytelling and they will speak each part. And the way that they'll denote that, like before that we were talking about, was a shift in the face, pitch, and tone. And they will generally use a piece of cloth and a fan as the sole props. And that is the entirety of the setting. Very, very minimalistic. And they're generally very funny. That you go to, and there are classic stories that you can hear that they tell. This is not gendered. It is very traditional for men, but we also have prominent female people that do it as well. So that's nice. It's not just all men or all women. They're very fun. The comedies are my favorite. And they play on language a lot. So if you're really into linguistics, or like the Japanese language in general, if you listen to a rakugo story, it's very interesting to hear, and the subtle differences, and it'll help you learn the language more. You'll definitely need subtitles to pick on that if you're not fully equated with the language. But it is very beautiful linguistically. Maybe not visually because it is just one person, but it's fantastic. Have either of you ever seen rakugo or have heard of it before?
See,
I brought it up.
that's my issue is unfortunately most of my knowledge of Japan is based either in archaic history books or from very brief glimpses within anime, which is why I ask specific questions because I'm interested to see if I may have seen it but may have not recognized it.
Well, fantastically, there is actually an anime about rakugo. Um, when was it made? It wasn't made that long. I say that and it's going to be like 2003 or something.
Again,
Uh,
just helping you feel older and older.
I felt young with the whole Columbo thing, and
Oh.
now I'm feeling older. Okay, so like 2016, 2015. That makes me feel a bit better. Oh my God, wait. Yeah, okay. I'm fine. It's not like 10 years ago. More like 8 or
Ooh,
something.
yeah.
But yeah, so it is called Showa Genroku Rakugo Shinju. I probably butchered that because it is very long and I'm dyslexic. But it is all about the transition from apprentice to master in Rakugo and the shift in popularity in it. So it does address those things. Fantastic anime. But yeah, it's it's a great art form. And I don't think a lot of people have um, really interacted with it as much, but it's very, very funny and I think accessible too.
Yeah, I think that's where a good majority of people tend to get their brief glimpses into Japanese culture, unfortunately. And I say unfortunately because it's a very interesting and very captivating culture, especially as an American where a lot of the differences are very polarizing.
I think people in the West don't really understand that there's more to Japan than anime. And that is sad. There are other art forms. I mean, most of the people in the West don't even know that there are different genres of anime, let alone different art styles and storytelling styles. And traditional theater, like rakugo, like kabuki, and no, and bunraku are absolutely amazing and diverse, and they have such dedication put into them by the actors and the artists. That when you think of Japan, if you only think of anime, that's really sad because there's so many other things, and you don't have to go to Japan to experience them. Um, you Even a live performance. There are traveling troops that perform in other places. There are Japanese American groups as well, I think, that do some of them. I know for Bunraku, they do have some. But yeah, it's just experience that. Get to know Japan outside of Naruto and Dragon
So
Ball Z and My Hero Academia.
I'm going to ask a really, really dumb question here, but I'm very curious as to what the answer is going to be.
Okay.
In the American animated series Avatar The Last Airbender, there
Okay.
was an entire episode based upon a play at Ember Island.
Yes.
What form of Japanese theater would this be most attributed to?
That looked like a
It,
Western stage play to me.
it was a Western stage play.
Okay.
It wouldn't have been
So,
any of them.
so
Okay.
if it was going to be anything, I'd have to say it might have been most similar to the Takarazuka review, since that is Japanese people performing Western art in their own style. But, that didn't have an all female cast in Avatar The Last Airbender. So it was kind of a more Shakespearean performance.
Almost.
Yeah.
I remember the person who played Aang was a female.
Yeah, I mean, you could also say it might be Kyogen, as it was very
Comedy.
satire and comedic and had like a slapstickness to it. But no, it wouldn't have been that. It's very much a Western stage
Yeah.
play.
Yeah, it fit most well with a Shakespearean style comedy. Overly
Yeah.
dramatic, stock characters, uh, curtain stage.
Yeah.
Like I said, I knew it was a dumb question, but I was interested to see because I know, well, while it is a great series for one, but they have a lot of aspects that are borrowed and Some are more true to their nature, some are more bastardized. So I wasn't sure where that fell along that spectrum.
Well, Avatar: The Last Airbender drew heavy inspiration from anime and Asian styles, and I think they're one of the few American productions that are very respectful in that way because they're not trying to be like, oh, you know, the firebenders are Koreans, but they want to take Asian influences of culture to put that in there to have that world buildingness because the way that they did bending was from martial arts. And so the martial arts you can connect to the culture that it's from and other things. I think that's where it comes from, but not the theater. The theater on Ember Island. That's just
The theater
Western.
is not. Yes, yes. The Airbenders have a Buddhist color palette to them, but that's about as deep as the connection goes.
Yeah, and I mean you have the architecture and some of the practice. Like there are a lot of cultural things that go with it that you can get to, but it is also its own thing as well. It's not trying to be a total ripoff, but it is still respectful.
And I don't think we've had enough controversial opinions on this episode, so I think it's a good time for me to say Avatar is anime. And I will drop
It's
the
not
mic.
really controversial. I think it's only controversial to like Western people.
They get
Um,
controversial because they argue that Avatar is more just American animation versus Japanese animation.
well, okay, so anime, get this, is the Japanese word for animation. So if you go to if you go to Japan, all cartoons are anime.
You're not.
There's not a difference there. They could play. Oh, I almost called
You're not in a
Yu-Gi-Oh an American
Kyojin.
cartoon.
Stop with the expression.
They could play Adventure Time, and there's like, yeah, anime. It is only in the West that we see anime as Japanese animation, and that is where you have that distinction.
If you
And then it,
disagree,
it
let
can
us
come
know in
into
the
art style,
comments.
but it's not.
Yeah.
We could get into a whole thing about that, but let's focus on Japanese
We have left the
theater.
realm of Japanese theater, and I don't know. I think we might be at a good point to wrap up at this point, seeing as
Yeah.
where
Yeah,
we
yeah.
have
So we
gone
don't get
to.
on any
So
more tangents.
yeah, so there are many forms of Japanese theater, most of which are older than this country that we live in, America.
Yes.
In fact,
And
I think there's only like two that aren't.
yeah.
But if you guys enjoyed listening to this podcast, be sure to drop a like down below. If you're following us on our platforms, be sure to follow us so you're up to date with any future episodes that we drop. And I do believe we have a couple of reads coming up, don't we?
Uh, yes.
Yes.
So the reads, the next set of reads, first up will be the Kojiki, a Japanese mytho history, which will be read for the first time by our very own Gwendolyn instead of me. So you're going to get a break from my face for once. I know, thank God.
Oh, stop it.
God save the oh, wait, sorry.
Yeah. And then
Get your colonial ass out of here.
yeah, those will be followed by the Havamal, a list of a poetic list of various edicts from the god Odin on how to live a good life. This will then be accompanied to round out the month with On the Revolutions of the Heavenly Spheres, a proposal that everything moves around the sun and moves in circles from the Renaissance period.
Crazy concept, really.
I hope you don't get excommunicated for that one there, bud.
No, we've moved past that. You 14th century fool. And On the Revolutions is to be the companion reads to our next podcast, which will be on Copernicus.
Ooh.
Yes.
Yeah, this will be our second podcast on a person. Should be very fun.
That is very exciting. And then immediately after Copernicus, we have the Republic of Texas. Because we have a whole state that was a country.
Yep.
Bouncing around. So exciting.
And that takes us into August.
But on that terrible bombshell, I think we're going to wrap it up here. So thank you guys for watching, and we'll catch you guys in 2 weeks.